our first guest, who is Professor Bernardine Evaristo. Bernardine is an activist, a critic, a poet, an author, and of course was the winner of the 2019 Booker Prize for her wonderful novel, Girl, Woman, Other. Good evening, Bernardine. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Hello, Bill. Hi, good to be here.
Well, thanks a lot for coming along, Bernardine. Now, you know, for some people, that might seem a strange choice. This is a Shakespeare Authorship Conference, and you are a very modern writer. But I thought there was a real link here. When we consider that this conference, we title it "I Alone Beweep My Outcast State," and we, you know, the blurb for the conference is. We say throughout the plays and poems, Shakespeare seems fascinated by themes of exile, exclusion, separation from loved ones, and he repeatedly dramatizes outsiders banished from favor. And a lot of work within academia focuses on this outsider status founded in whether it be race, gender, sexuality, all sorts of various outsider statuses. And this did make me think then about this novel of Girl, Woman, Other. Now, for some of our attendees, they may not know the novel. So I wonder, would you be kind enough to just tell us what is it, why is it, and particularly around why you structured it in the way that you did?
So the novel is about 12 primarily Black British women. So it's a novel about Black British womanhood. One character is non-binary, and they are co-protagonists, and they span about 120 years of British history. It's a contemporary novel set today. The characters have some varying degrees of interconnection with each other. They are aged 19 to 93. They live in different parts of the country, and they are from different cultural backgrounds, different sexualities. About a quarter of the women are on the queer spectrum, and they have different family setups and occupations. And yeah, it's a book about the multiplicity of Black British womanhood. The form I call fusion fiction, which I think I've invented, which is, it's quite an experimental form in that there are very few full stops, but instead of the text looking like huge blocks of text, I've employed what I call a pro-poetic patterning on the page. So it reads in a very fluid way, and it almost looks like poetry, but it's not quite poetry. And then all of the women have their own sections in the book, but it's not a book of short stories, it is a single novel. And the fusion aspect of the novel is also about their stories fusing with each other. In a nutshell, there you go.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, I've read it twice, and it is it's quite a unique novel, I have to say. I mean, knowing all of your previous work, I can see definitely where certain aspects of it have sprung from. But when we consider the characters, and you just delineated the nature of the characters there, generally speaking, would you say that these characters are outsiders? And if they are, what are they outside?
Yes. Well, interesting question. I've never actually haven't actually been asked that, and I've probably done about 200 interviews in the last year. So it's great when I get questions. I have to actually think about it. They are outsiders in lots of different ways. Obviously, not to each other and not in their own communities, but certainly in terms of British society. Then these are women of colour primarily. And so they are visually marked, as in a sense. They are seen as visually different to the mainstream. And so that in itself will mark somebody as an outsider. But then there are degrees of marginalisation that the women experience in the novel. And as I said, it goes back 120 years. Well, it goes back 120 years or so. So it goes back to the late 19th century. So the experience of a mixed race woman growing up in Northumberland at the end of the last century is very different to a 19-year-old Black woman coming of age today at university, very politicized and with two very middle-class parents. So there are all these sort of distinctions between the women in terms of how they are positioned in society at large, I would say. And, you know, the main question is that they are not, as I said, outsiders to themselves, but in different ways they will be seen as outsiders in society, but also they will view each other as outsiders. Because as I said, I didn't want a novel that was a heterosexual novel, because there were these 12 equal protagonists. So I thought I'm going to have quite a few queer people. There are a quarter of the characters are on the queer spectrum. Not all, the novel does not propagate a single thesis, right? So some people might approach the book and think, oh, right, these women are all kind of in agreement about something, but they're not. It's all about multiplicity, I don't want to use the word, but diversity, and they're just so different from each other. So the women who are on the queer spectrum are not necessarily going to be feel necessarily welcomed or included by some of the women in the novel. And some of the women in the novel are arguably homophobic. So that's one way in which they other each other. Right. And then you have also class. So the women are varying classes, and they also move through to different classes, which is the reality for a lot of people. And they have different, as I said, occupations, and they also have different backgrounds. So some of the women come to this country as immigrants, not many of them, but they are definitely outsiders. When you go to a foreign country, you're definitely an outsider. But some of them are actually, many of them are born in Britain, and some of them are third or fourth generation British. So their experience of being outsiders might change relative to that. So yeah, so definitely you could frame the novel within an outsider context. Yeah. But it's not simplistic. It's quite hard to summarize it, really. I mean, I'm finding it hard to summarize it because there are so many distinctions.
Yeah. I could do an academic thing there and summarize it for you.
Yeah, please.
What academics do with writers, isn't it? I'll tell you what you meant.
Yeah.
But is there, I mean, this might sound simplistic. Is there one thing, a general thing, that they are all excluded from?
Not necessarily excluded from, but perceived differently by the society. Because if you are a person of color in this country, outside of the London bubble, right, which is like 40% BAME or whatever, then there's always going to be an issue. I mean, that may not be a problem for you. I have members of my family, my sisters, who move through the world very fluently, and just kind of race isn't much of an issue for them. But I'm a very political animal, so I'm very aware of all kinds of things. So I would say that if you are a person of colour, and nearly all the women are of colour in the novel, pretty much all of them, but don't want to give the game away, then yeah, you're in a sense, it can be a barrier that is put in front of you.
Okay, now there is one character in the novel, and I'm talking about Aman. So I don't want to give too much away either. She's the first chapter, but she reappears. And how can I put it? Within the novel, during the novel, she attains a certain amount of success in an establishment context. Does that change her status? Did she, again, I'm simplifying here, does she go from an outsider to an insider, or how does that interface work?
Are you asking me that question of myself, Bill? Is that what you're working your way around to?
Okay, don't just look, I've got a script here, so can you just answer my question? I'll come to that. Yes, of course I'm going to ask that.
Yeah, she's somebody, I mean, I have a theatre background. She is somebody who comes of age in the 1980s. She sets up a theatre company, Bush Women Theatre Company. It's a women of colour theatre company, as I did. And, you know, I know there are quite a few theatre people here, so they will be aware at least of the 1980s and probably even the 1970s and even earlier, when there were so many alternative theatre companies, and they were all from and speaking to different constituencies, because people didn't feel that they were catered to by the sort of mainstream theatre provision in this country. And that's definitely how I felt, and that's how Emma felt. So she's been somebody who has been basically in community theatre, fringe theatre, alternative theatre for nearly 40 years. And then a woman takes over as the director of the National Theatre, which hasn't happened yet, as we know. And she gets this phone call, and the director says, "Oh, I love your work, and I want you to come and do something with us." And that leads to Amma putting on a play, The Last Amazon of Dahomey, at the National Theatre, and that's where the book opens. And it's a huge shift for her, from somebody who has definitely felt that she's been on the fringe of society in theatre and the arts and the rest of it, and it's very radical. She's a lesbian. She's, you know, she considers herself to be very principled, although one of the things about the book is that anybody who considers themselves to be kind of morally righteous, their kind of self-esteem gets punctured in all kinds of ways by the characters. And so she does have this play on at the National Theatre, but it's on her own terms, because it's a play that she's written and she's directing it, and it's a Black woman's production. And she does grapple with the idea of, if she's sold out, and one of her old theatre mates, Dominic, you know, he thinks she's sold out, and she does have imposter syndrome, because she has literally made this huge leap from outside to inside the heart of the theatre establishment. Now, myself, I have been slowly working my way towards the establishment over the course of my life. So it's not such a stark transition from one to the other. But yeah, there are definitely parallels between Amma and myself.
Yeah, so that's the question you guessed that I wanted to ask. You know, this is an authorship conference, and so you know, we're an authorship organization, and you as an author, did you for many years regard yourself as a kind of outsider from the establishment, and you know, I mean the kind of literary establishment even, and did the Booker Prize, winning that suddenly, obviously it's made you a lot busier, that's absolutely clear, but has it done something to your, I guess your identity in many ways, of where you sit, where you see yourself sitting within this establishment?
Yeah, I've become completely impossible, Bill. You know, my ego is so inflated. You know, it's a good question. It's definitely, but as I said, for me, it wasn't such a big transition, but actually winning the Booker Prize is massive. And I think I only realized how massive it was, even though it was something I'd wanted for a long time, when it actually happened. And it was a complete career changer for me. You know, it's just completely revolutionized my career. But what's so interesting is that it happened literally overnight. Overnight, I was Bernardine Evaristo, written 8 books, you know, I've got very good reviews, I've had awards and the rest of it, but I hadn't had the big award, or actually I hadn't had a big award. And suddenly I'd got the, you know, the Plum Award, and everything changed. How I was seen changed. And I have been kind of recalibrating, in a sense, my identity ever since, because it just was so phenomenal for me at the age of 60, as I was last year. And after 40 years in the arts, starting off with this really radical experimental theatre, and actually the book is a radical experimental novel, whether it's won the Booker or not, it's a radical experimental novel. And then suddenly I am in the heart of the establishment, and I have completely exploited that all year. And in so many ways, I feel that I'm absolutely at the center of things. Right. And I feel ecstatic about it. I've completely lost my cool factor, I have to say, because I've been a very cool person all my life, but I'm not anymore. So I do feel ecstatic about it. And I am an activist, as you said. So I use my platform to shout out and speak out so that there is more inclusiveness in the arts, especially in literature. And in a sense, I have the two things going on. On the one hand, I have this incredible career now which, 35 languages, so many books sold and the rest of it. And also so much respect and such a sense of validation for myself. And then I have the activism, and I use that for those people who still need the exposure.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's, I cannot say that I'm an outsider. And I'd say until fairly recently, I would say that I'm inside the citadel, but I'm still an outsider. But I don't think I can say that to anybody in literature anymore, because they would just beat me up, because it's just not true, because I am taking up a lot of oxygen right now, and, very much affiliated with the mainstream.
But if we carry on that analogy, I mean, you called it a citadel there. Let's call it the court. You're now in the court, as it were. What does that give you access to that you didn't have before?
Bigger house.
Access to riches, okay. But
access. Well, you see, I'm very interested in power. And I have been interested in power for a long time, actually. So that, as you know, I joined Brunel in 2011. And so I saw how power worked in academia, and I didn't really know about it before then. I'd had sort of various gigs, but I hadn't actually been on faculty. So I saw how power worked. And of course, universities are incredibly powerful, and you're teaching the next generation of thinkers and young people, and sending them out into the world. And I've had other positions, until this year, I was vice chair of the Royal Society of Literature. And that in itself is a powerhouse. And I write for the national newspapers. And of course, we know the media is incredibly powerful. So for me, what the thing that I've observed, and the thing that I'm really interested in, is how power works and how you can use it for the greater good. Because as I always say, I'm not interested in the status quo, because the status quo hasn't represented, spoken up for, included so many people. And it needs to change, and there needs to be people working on it from the outside, and there needs to be people inside. And I know that we need to be in those powerful positions. We need to be in government, we need to be in the boardrooms, we need to be everywhere. And when I say we, however that applies, right? So that's the big difference for me. It's about having power. If I send a tweet now, I have to be really careful. I'm sorry, if I post a tweet, I have to be really careful, because it can become a quote in newspapers. That is power, right? When people are listening to you and paying attention to you and taking you very seriously.
Okay, thanks for that. I've got a final question for you, and I thought, why not ask a really unfair question? So here it comes. Now, it's unfair because you'll understand as I say it. Many people in this area of this Shakespeare authorship, they feel that, for example, so many of the plays articulate clearly an insider knowledge of the court and of kings and queens, because the knowledge that is articulated seems so profound and so accurate. As a writer, what do you feel about that? Do you feel that a writer would need to experience that sort of thing to be able to capture it accurately? Let me give an example. If I flip your example the other way around, and I think it still applies, would, for example, Martin Amis or Don DeLillo be able to write Girl, Woman, Other?
I had a bit of beef with Martin Amis the other day. Not that he paid any attention to it, but so you're talking about cultural appropriation without actually using that term, I guess. No, for sure. Martin Amis, I don't think he reads anything that has been published in the last 50 years. I mean, he will say that himself. I think he said that the other day. So there you go. So if you're not up to date with contemporary writing, then you're not going to be able to write something like my book, which is so contemporary. And it's very much involved in the conversations that are happening now around, the book isn't about racism, but it is there, and gender and sexuality and class and all those conversations that are so interesting. So he wouldn't be able to write Girl, Woman, Other in a Million Years. But if he wanted to write it, and I understand he's writing a book about Black Lives Matter, that's interesting. So we'll see how that goes. But I think he has the right to do it. So my response to cultural appropriation is that culture is something we all own, right? And that also it's something that's very porous and it's very nebulous. You know, so much of what we have in this culture comes from elsewhere, right? I mean, from the sort of the empire, from other countries in the world. I mean, it's just, I don't think anybody owns or has the right to own culture. I just think it's something that is out there and we draw on it to create our art. So yeah, I think everybody needs to be able to write from whatever kind of characters, whatever kind of story they want to write. And I think a really healthy literary culture is one where people are doing that. And I don't even think there's an issue about getting it right, apart from obvious factual things, because I think we have to have that artistic freedom. Having said all that, I would be very surprised if, you know, somebody like Martin Amis would be able to pull off a book written in the voice of a Black woman, because I don't think that would probably be very effective, but we'll see. But I would defend his right to be able to do that. But of course, there are also consequences to that. And the cultural appropriation issue is really interesting, because people talk about novels, fiction, and you know that is an issue. Cultural appropriation is an issue, and people have been smacked down because they've stepped out of line, and they've written from perspectives and characters that are not part of their culture. So that's literature, right? But when we look at screen drama and theatre, right, most of the time people don't know who's written it, right? When you're watching television drama, they often don't know who's written it. You look at EastEnders or Coronation Street or any film, right? And it's multicultural, and you know, white writers probably writing Black characters, and that is acceptable. So why, if the rule applies to screen drama, for example, that yes, anybody can write any character from any perspective, why is there a problem when it comes to fiction? And it's just not logical to me. That's my position.
Great. Okay. Well, listen, Bernardine, thank you so much for taking some time to speak with us. I think it's a wonderful opener, a very thoughtful context for the whole conference to take place. Thank you so much. I know you're dying to get off to a bottle of wine now. Aren't we all? So thank you so much. I'm just listening now. I think I can hear lots of Zoom applause everywhere. And you have had people from the States, from Canada, from Copenhagen, from, Kent, Blackpool. Oh, wow. Okay. Ireland, Berlin, New Jersey. Oh, God, all over Washington, Battersea. Wow. So all over the place, and 160 of them. So thanks ever so much, Bernardine.
Thanks, Bill.
And speak to you soon.
Yes, thanks everybody. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye, Bernardine.